Well, the countdown is on. There are just 2 days left at the all-important climate summit happening right now in Copenhagen. But the news is the talks are deadlocked, just as more than 190 world leaders, including Prime Minister Stephen Harper, are set to arrive. He leaves for Copenhagen later tonight. And with expectations for an agreement melting like the icebergs negotiators are trying to save, talks were disrupted today by the biggest day of protests yet. Let's take a look at some of those. As you can see, police used batons and tear gas on a massive crowd trying to storm the well-protected convention center. The protesters are angry at being locked out of the talks. Police apparently made more than 200 arrests. So, as you can see, there's a lot of anger outside. There's a lot of agitation inside. Rich and poor nations are still very much at odds over a climate deal. So is it even realistic to expect that a deal on emissions targets will be made with just 2 days left? Our next guest, Canadians have come to know him as one of the strongest advocates for the environment. David Suzuki is watching the summit very closely, and he joins me now live from Vancouver. David, thanks for being here. And as you heard me just say, there's only 2 days left. How would you rate the progress, or what are your hopes for this summit?
Well, it's going just about what I expected, and it may very well be that, as in Kyoto, someone will come to the rescue at the last minute and cobble together some kind of compromise deal. I personally think the worst thing to happen at Copenhagen will be to come up with a half-hearted deal rather than the strong agreement that we really need for heavy cuts. But you know, the whole process is simply started the wrong way. I think there are two fundamental problems with the whole negotiating process. One is we take our borders very, very seriously. You know, we throw a line around our property, our provinces, our cities, our countries, and we're willing to go and fight and die over those borders. But you know, air doesn't care. Air doesn't care where the borders are, or water, or land that blows over the oceans, or migrating fish and birds and mammals, or windblown seeds. Nature doesn't care about our borders. And yet all of the negotiations are going on as if these borders are really important. The only time you see those borders disappear is when, in a science fiction movie, when an alien from outer space comes in and starts killing human beings. And guess what? We're calling the Russians, we're calling the Chinese, because we see the threat to us as a species. But right now, going into this, you know, we talk about how many nations are there, and we're all negotiating from our own national vested interests. So that's problem number one. Number two is the economy seems to be dominating everything, and we must be realistic. Our current Prime Minister, the minute he assumed office almost 4 years ago now, he immediately said, we're not going to pay any attention to Kyoto. It'll destroy the economy. Excuse me, the excuse for Canadians has always been we're a northern country and we need a lot of energy. But wait a minute, Sweden is a northern country. I just spent a week in Stockholm, and Stockholm is their biggest city. Guess what? It got night at 2:30 in the afternoon, and the light came up at 10 in the morning. It's very far north. Sweden instituted a carbon tax in the 1990s. They now pay $120 a ton to put carbon in the atmosphere. They've reduced greenhouse gas emissions by 8% below 1990 levels. That's beyond the Kyoto target. And guess what? Their economy grew by 44% during that time. What kind of a leader would come to the country and say, we don't care about international agreements that Canada's signed on to because a bogus argument, it'll destroy the economy to try to do that. Sweden proves that it's simply not true. And yet Canada has done virtually nothing to meet this issue. And I think that it would be a big step if our Prime Minister would at least tell Canadians whether or not he believes human-induced climate change is a problem.
Are you suggesting that the Prime Minister doesn't even believe that human-induced climate change is a problem, and that combating carbon emissions is a serious... Because clearly the Environment Minister has said the government is committed to a 20% reduction by 2020 to 2006 levels,
although 2006. That is one of the most pernicious things that we've done. We've shifted the baseline from 1990 to 2006, as if suddenly that's the standard that we've got to go down by. This is just smoke and mirrors of the worst kind. 1990 has been the agreement since the 1990s, and countries are trying to meet that or using that as their standard.
Well,
Ours is saying,
you talk about 2006, but the CBC has obtained documents that raise questions about the government's ability to even meet that 20% reduction from 2006 levels of greenhouse gas emissions by 2020. Today, the Environment Minister, Jim Prentice, he did stick by that goal, but there is word that they're thinking about giving the oil sands perhaps a different break on that. And in fact,
of course.
What's your view on that? And then,
course.
by the way, they're saying because it is, by the way, because the oil sands creates jobs, creates money that is transferred to other provinces, and that's their notion of the balance.
You know, that's what they used to say in the southern states. We can't give up slavery because it'll destroy our economy, and slavery gives us jobs, and we have to have slave runners and all of that. Some things you do because they're right. And
But David, just for the record, and I know you're passionate, but is comparing this to slavery, is that a fair to demonize the other side like that?
We're talking about the fate of all of humankind and the kind of future we're going to leave for our children. Yes, I think this is criminal, what's going on now, to act as if the economy, remember, the economy is a human-created construct. It's not a law of nature. You know, some things like gravity and the speed of light, you can't do anything about that. We can't do anything about the fact that we're animals. And if we don't have clean air, clean water, clean soil, clean energy, and biodiversity, we're dead. So surely to goodness, that should come before anything else. That's our very survival mechanism. And yet we have put the economy above that. All I'm asking for my leader, Mr. Harper is my Prime Minister, please tell us whether or not you think human-induced climate change is real and whether it's serious. At least I'd like to know what our starting position is on this, because Canada as a country is probably more vulnerable to climate change than any of the other industrialized nations. And we're a northern country.
And so David, I mean, you've said that you think this Copenhagen summit is doomed. What would you like to see happen there, given all your criticisms about nationalism and the ability, and what you say is the Prime Minister's lack of commitment on this? What would you like to see happen at Copenhagen?
Well, I'd like to see Copenhagen say, look, we can't get a deal. We are not going to water it down just to suit Canada or Saudi Arabia. We want a strong, hard deal. We'll wait till next year until we get the negotiations going along further. But we've got to say, nature sets the limits, not us. Nature. And nature has already indicated we're producing more carbon dioxide than all of the green things in the ocean and on land can reabsorb. That's a limit. And if we are going to live within... What is the enforceable
target? I mean, the key is, we had those targets at Kyoto. Countries just decided not to abide by them. How do you... Is there a mechanism that can make countries abide by them and actually make some hard targets?
I'm not a politician. I would have thought that there are international ways of making such deals and enforcing them with sanctions or whatever you want to do. One of our criticisms of Kyoto was it had no teeth. It was just something that was set. And by the way, most of the countries that signed on are going to meet those targets, but there was no way of enforcing them if a country like Canada came along and said, oh, we're not going to do anything about it anyway. We need, if we're going to have such regulation, we need ones with teeth, a way of punishing those that fail to meet them. If we don't have that, then it's just on paper, and any rinky-dink country or person can say, no, I'm not going to even bother trying. We've got to say that the world on which we depend is telling us what the limits are, and we have to get our activities down to live within those limits as quickly as possible.
Even if you say that costs people standards of living and costs people jobs?
Well, I mean, we haven't even begun to try to reduce emissions. I think that the opportunities are enormous. Just look at what Germany has done. Their major job-producing area is in the renewable energy sector. They made a commitment, and they realized the enormous benefits. So to start off by saying, "Oh my God, if we get off petrochemicals, my God, it's going to be," we haven't even looked at what the alternatives are. I want to tell you something. I was a senior in college in the United States in